Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest Serviced Apartment News webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing how the role of an operator is evolving. My name's George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief at International Hospitality Media, and we are a publisher of online B2B news sites for the hospitality and real estate sectors, and we also organise conferences, events and awards. Now, this Serviced Apartment News webinar series is sponsored by IMS, and we are just going to watch a short video to find out more about them. Okay, so thanks to IMS for sponsoring. If you'd like to get in touch with those guys and find out more, you can see their contact details in the chat. So today's webinar is going to last an hour. We're going to have roughly 45 minutes of discussion with our panel, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions, and we'd like to make it as interactive as we can, please do submit them using the chat or the Q&A functions in Zoom. Everyone who has registered for the session will receive a link to a recording of it in the next couple of days too. So I just wanted to show a couple of screen grabs from stories that we've run on Serviced Apartment News over the last year or so, just to show some of the things that operators are doing as the industry is evolving. So we've seen operators branch into different accommodation segments. So we can see there that Urban Creation are opening some of their student accommodation assets as serviced apartments during the holidays. Native, which began life as an apart hotel operator and still does have several apart hotels, now has a bigger build to rent pipeline than it does apart hotels. We've seen operators moving into new locations, such as Your Apartment now moving into London. We've seen them moving into the short-term vacation rental space. And we're also seeing an increased focus on sustainability, as with Mansley in the bottom right story, and we're going to hear a little about that later on from David. So we've got a fantastic panel, 3 operators, all different in the way they go about things, but all progressive and all growing. And we're going to ask the guys to introduce themselves in turn. We'll go from left to right. Toby was having transport problems, as a lot of people are today. So he may not be here right now, but he will be with us shortly. So we'll start with you, Claire. Claire, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Week to Week.
Hi, I'm Claire Parry. Week to Week Serviced Apartments. We are based in Newcastle, originally founded in the year 2000. We've been around a long time, pre-OTAs as well. So we're quite seasoned in serviced apartment and short-term rental industry.
Thanks, Claire. And David, good afternoon to you.
Hi there. So I'm David Wright. I'm representing Mansley Serviced Apartments. We operate 7 properties around the UK at the moment. We've got 3 in London, 2 in Edinburgh, Inverness and Cheltenham. My job as portfolio development manager is to source out new opportunities for us. We are looking to grow, so sourcing the market for acquisition opportunities, lease opportunities, and have also been conceptualizing a sort of partner program project which could allow sort of interested operators to co-brand with us and sort of benefit from some of the sort of distribution assets that we have.
Excellent, thanks David, and some very nice branding in the background there.
Mm-hmm.
At the risk of sounding like a medium at a seance, Toby, are you there? No, I guess he'll be with us shortly, and we'll have an introduction from Toby when he arrives. You can see the LinkedIn profiles for all our panelists in the chat. If you'd like to carry on the conversation with them after the session, then please do. So this session is really about how an operator's role is evolving. So I mainly want to look forward, but I just want to ask you both quickly, what were the main things your businesses had to do to adapt to the pandemic to get you to where you are today? Do you want to go first with that one, David?
Yes, so we are heavily a leisure-based company. So I know a lot of people focus heavily on the corporates, but we're heavy on the leisure. So, and we had a lot of overseas leisure at that. So we were quite used to a lot of business coming in from Australia, New Zealand, North America. So when obviously COVID came along, those countries, you know, especially sort of Australia, New Zealand, the borders shut, no one left, was a big, you know, it was a big change all of a sudden not to have that sort of tried and tested stream of business coming in. So obviously, you know, occupancies did fall away. We did manage to sort of pivot and find other business, and we did get along quite as well as I think could be expected in that situation, and saw our average length of stay increase because we found sort of the business where maybe it was like more 30-40 night stays, which is not something that we are used to, but we did manage to find that. But we also used the sort of quieter time to actually consolidate some of our tech. So we had progressed a little bit, taking on Inverness, a couple of properties in Edinburgh, Inverness, and Cheltenham in quite quick succession. They was on different systems, and so we actually used the time where we were a little bit quiet to align everything onto one system to streamline processes. So we made use of the time in other ways.
Yeah, you certainly weren't sitting on your hands. Great stuff.
No.
Claire, as a business mainly focused on corporate demand, what were the main changes you had to make?
We had to diversify pretty quickly. People wanted a lot of flexibility. Obviously, at the time, it's an unknown period. We had some international in-house guests when we went into lockdown and things, and so we continued to support them. And we started to support existing corporate clients on a national basis more so, as opposed to people who just wanted to stay in Newcastle. We were fortunate in the sense that we were able to continue to support essential workers, and construction kept us going as well, which was good. And you know, we offer things like flexible cancellation, which was always more rigid, for example. And you know, we stripped out a lot of the red tape, so things like, you know, linen supply. We were very respectful of obviously the lockdowns, but also people's anxieties around COVID and that sort of thing. So we did linen drop-offs as we started to evolve and restrictions started to ease. We offered, you know, housekeeping if people wanted it, which is something in the history of the business we've never done. It's always been something that's, you know, that's happened on a weekly basis. So we've become a lot more flexible with that sort of thing, which you know, we continue with now, and the response is still positive.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Toby, good to see you. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your apartment briefly, and tell us what the main things that you had to do as a business to get through the pandemic to arrive at where you are today?
apologies, I'm slightly late. So I'm the director and co-founder of Your Apartment. We are a company that started operation in Bristol with about 180 units under our operation in that city. We've now started operating in London and just on the outskirts of London. We're heavily corporate with probably an 80-20 split in the favour of corporate travel. So during the pandemic, we saw that drop off dramatically. I think that we always had an element of contractors, building contractors that were staying with us. And it seemed a lot of building contractors would actually use your budget hotels, your Premier Inns, your travel lodges, all of those type of offerings. However, during the pandemic, all of those were closed. So we just heavily focused our marketing quite quickly, pay-per-click advertising, and so on the building contractors. And, you know, we were operating at between a 65 and 75% occupancy during COVID. So although it wasn't where we were before and rates were maybe slightly more favourable, we weren't a million miles away from what we were making pre-pandemic. We expanded probably with 100 units during COVID. So we kind of used, although it was a very frantic time at the front end, the operation changed slightly in terms of housekeeping, maintenance, and these things, maybe being more considerate to guests, more so the leisure element of guests that we maybe already had in-house pre-pandemic, that were already, you know, they were away from home, maybe international guests or whatever. But, you know, in the main, we kind of really carried on as we were before, and we were quite fortunate for that.
Yeah. And staying with you for a minute, Toby, so as business travel is coming back, I think it's fair to say it's coming back in a different shape. People's business travel habits are different. How are you seeing that, and how are you reacting to that in terms of your marketing and your distribution?
I think the people that have historically used serviced apartments have continued to do so. I just think it's brought a new element of business traveller to serviced apartments as opposed to going to your historic hotel offering. I think that companies have maybe had to become more mindful of where they put their staff, and where they may have had, you know, two guys sharing a room on single beds. They may now actually take more rooms and have less people per apartment. I think that the whole apartment thing allows, you know, washing machines, making their own meals, becomes actually more cost effective for those companies that were maybe spending more using hotels. So, you know, always round, it's been positive, and you know, it's just broadened the type of people that would look at this market as something for their staff and, you know, any business travelers really. Yeah.
And going forward, do you think your ratio of business to leisure travelers will settle down at roughly what it was pre-pandemic, or do you think it's changed irrecoverably?
I think that's very location dependent, but, you know, Bristol as one market is very fortunate to have a heavy leisure fall of visitors. For example, we're just opening a new unit in Milton Keynes, which is the complete opposite. It's pretty much solely corporate, and, you know, the length of stay and the local amenity and attractions kind of will guide that. But I think that, you know, I think it will probably fall back to where we were before, about an 80-20 split, and that really is Monday to Friday corporate, Saturday, Sunday leisure, and then where you have your extended stay piece, it's probably more corporate, or families, you know, relocating, schooling, all those type of things.
Yeah, thanks, Toby. And Claire, how has your corporate business changed, if at all, in terms of the type of people coming, the length of stay, the purpose of their visit, and so on? Is it, obviously you used to have a big international presence before, is that coming back?
Yes, definitely. We're seeing a lot of international people coming back. I think people are ready to travel again. You know, it's been a bit of a roller coaster going through COVID, you know, where it was, you know, people were ringing today to book and stay tonight because they were that unsure. And you know, fast forwarding to now, yeah, we echo the same split as Toby. You know, it's an 80-20 corporate, corporate leisure split, and we did see spikes in leisure travellers during restrictions ease and that sort of thing, and had leisure travellers like we've never had leisure travellers before, which was great. And we will see some of those clients come back, but yes, coming back to the corporate market, definitely back to the split, and I see that continuing as well. I don't see that changing.
And have you seen any trends in length of stay for your corporate guests?
Yes, more long stays, so around the sort of 30 nights. Yeah, definitely long stays rather than nights or weeks at a time.
David, you mentioned that your customer base is predominantly leisure. How do you market to that audience, and how has your distribution mix evolved over the last couple of years, and how do you see it going in the future?
Yeah, so we are probably 80-20 split, but on the other way. So we are, mostly leisure and trying to sort of increase more on the corporate side. So distribution has changed a lot for us. So pre-pandemic, we also ran an agency, our company, and so we was quite heavily ensconced with some of the big wholesalers in that industry, which brought about a lot of the business from New Zealand, Australia, North America. So that's we maybe had a slight over-reliance on that pre-pandemic. So that's actually been scaled back. We've kept a couple of the sort of prime contracts in place, but we're sort of optimizing it through strategic partnerships with those people now. And then obviously we are using OTAs, as everyone does, but independent travel agents we use a lot, and we recently signed up with hotel res as the way to the GDS. So that's sort of that's actually something very new for us, but I've seen some quite good traction through that already. So that's how we're hoping to sort of grow that side of the business.
Mm-hmm. Did you move any of your inventory across to ASTs for the sort of longer term residential market?
No.
But does the company have that? Do you have a separate division where you have AST?
Yes, I mean, I'm here as Mansley Serviced Apartments, which the sort of parent of that Mansley Group Holdings, a division of that does have sort of some other property that is not used for our short-term rental. It's nothing I get involved with, so yeah, I can't talk about it.
Separate entities, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And Claire, you mentioned the short-term rental market. So do you have a separate pool of inventory to serve that client base, or is it all in one pot and you just manage demand accordingly?
Yeah, we're a bit of a hybrid now, so I guess we've evolved over time, and we have a mixture of models that we use in business, but with the quality of the product and consistency across the brand. So people who are staying with us are looking into the brand and our integrity and our quality mark and that sort of thing. But behind the scenes, yes, we are a hybrid model.
Yeah. Okay. Toby, what about you? Do you have two separate strands, and how does the distribution work there? Do you use Airbnb, for example, for your weekend inventory?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of direct marketing to either previous customers or cold calling to new companies, but we use all the online travel agents that are in the public domain, and also some that may not be so well known. I think that Booking.com is a big supplier of leisure bookings. I think predominantly because of their cancellation policies. I think that's something that drives their business quite heavily. Coming back to a question you were asking about, kind of, is there any medium to long-term rental? It's something we did with maybe 20% of our units very, very early on in the pandemic. And we didn't offer it at residential lettings rates. It was still a premium for a fully furnished apartment, bills inclusive, but it wasn't the same rate that we were charging, on a nightly rate. So that's something we did kind of for a bit of cash flow and a bit of security. But in hindsight, we probably didn't need to.
Okay. Do any of you, Claire or David, do you use Airbnb?
We do use Airbnb, yes. It's actually quite a big source for us, actually. I think in terms of OTA distribution, Airbnb is just behind Booking.com.
Okay.
And
sorry, I was just going to say, yeah, we use you know, all the available distribution channels. So, you know, all of the OTAs that we can to maximise the return for our investors. You know, whilst we're not dependent on the income from the OTAs, because the majority of our bookings come in direct, so we're quite fortunate in that regard. But yes, we do use them more as a buffer, if you like.
Yeah. And how have you built up that direct booking strategy over the years to where it is today? And what are the main challenges in developing that?
It is challenging. I guess I echo what Toby was saying before about running pay-per-click campaigns. It's all about online visibility from a brand point of view. You know, brand awareness is huge, but also about having, you know, we hear a lot in the industry at the moment about trust. You know, I'm very big on, you know, our kind of family ethos in the company, so it's portraying that. But I think with regards to reaching clients, it's about online visibility. So it's about, you know, our pay-per-click campaign, our SEO, you know, and the various ways that we reach out to our clients directly. But also, you know, repeat custom. We're very fortunate in the sense that, you know, once we start working with somebody, you know, they stay with us, and it's repeat business as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Claire. Toby, how is the proportion of TMC business coming in looking? Is that anywhere near pre-pandemic levels?
No, I don't think so. I think that that things, you know, we came out of the pandemic and we saw a huge shoot of leisure bookings because people couldn't go anywhere, still couldn't go overseas. So that kind of shot that a bit out of kilter. After about 6 months, that came back in line, and I think that now we're really where we were pre-pandemic, and we've probably been like that now for about 9 months to a year, I would say.
Okay, and Claire, does that tally with you?
Sorry, George, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the volume of TMC business, is it back to where it was pre-pandemic?
Yes, it is. We're seeing more and more, actually. I think, you know, serviced apartments and apartments are being offered more as standard now, you know, in corporate offerings, and you know, that's showing as well. Yeah. Okay. So you're all looking to grow your businesses and add new inventory. What are the main challenges involved in that process of securing new units? Toby, do you want to go first? Because I know you've opened a couple recently and you've got a couple more in the pipeline. Yeah,
I mean, it's an ongoing battle trying to find, you know, we get offered a lot of inventory that may be a mile in the wrong direction, maybe too small, maybe too old. You know, there's a lot of boxes to tick to get a right location, and it's not just being in the right place on the street. And I think that that's one thing that we faced. A lot of student developers are seeing the market as an option, so they can come out of maybe as much heavy management of tenants. But historically, student stock has not been great. So, you know, a lot of capex maybe needs to go at the front end that a landlord may not be willing to spend. So that's another hurdle that we continually trying to get over, whether it's with student or existing residential stock. Also, use class is an issue. A lot of people don't want to go back in for planning and change from C3 to C1. And especially in central London, that's a real issue, as I'm sure we all are aware. But, you know, we think it's something like 1 in 50 sites that we look at becomes more due diligence led. The other 49 are very on the periphery of early levels of due diligence, but quite quickly kind of become a no-go. Yeah. And who is your predominant competitors when you're looking at a building? Is it another serviced apartment operator, or is there a broad range of people that you're up against? Broad range. You know, some people are doing this real high-end residential kind of offering bills inclusive, but long term, we're seeing a lot more of that happening. And those guys, because they're making maybe a bit more of a premium, they're going in maybe a bit heavier in terms of the rent and making smaller margins, but there's also it's less management heavy in their model, so they're able to do that. We're also losing out some buildings to student providers. People like Native that are now starting to do a lot more management on PRS schemes. You know, those type of things are bringing new kind of element of provider to the market. So yeah, and it's also, you know, finding the landlord that fits the mold, that they've built something, they want to hold it, and they're happy to keep you as a tenant, as opposed to they're looking for a blue chip stay city covenant that will come in there and then they can look to flog that on within 6 months of you being in there. So that's for us personally anyway, that's probably one of the biggest hurdles.
Yeah, okay, thanks Toby. David, you're obviously coming at this from a different angle, and although you did mention leasing earlier, your predominant model is to own the assets that you operate. So does that change the way you look at a building, and who are you competing against when you're trying to buy one?
Well, a lot of things that Toby said are true for us. To actually first get a property to the point where you think we're seriously look at this one, there's a lot that you discard. So, you know, we are very focused on sort of our core values that we think, you know, great locations, properties that provide space. You know, if you've been to a Mansley apartment, they're generally very nice and spacious. You know, we're not necessarily just trying to cram as many units in as we can, so it has got to fit with our brand. So you do you know, pass over on a lot of opportunities to find the right one. We've got a couple of projects ongoing at the minute that I can't say too much about at the moment, but one is another acquisition. So, you know, that is sort of our preference to buy, but obviously you can only buy so much. I think, you know, that sort of slows down sort of the scale of increasing your number of properties you've got if you're buying and developing, because we've got to develop as well. So, you know, that all in all takes like a year and a half or more. So we are also looking at sort of lease opportunities now. So that's a little different direction that we're going in terms of, I'd say our sort of target size property is more sort of 20 to 50 units. So, you know, I know we're not sort of competing against your citadines and probably stay cities of this world who are looking at sort of the tier above, but you know, that's where we are. I guess probably Toby, in some ways, in your apartment sort of we've probably passed over some of the same properties that we're looking at. So so I think, you know, that's sort of our range and criteria that we're looking for.
Yeah, thanks David. And Claire, you've got another model again. So how do you add to your inventory, and what are the challenges involved?
I mean, the majority of our portfolio is managed on behalf of owners. We have a small amount of rent-to-rents as well. And I guess the biggest challenge we have is time. We work a lot with international investors as well. You know, and with international investment, you know, it can take anything between sort of 3 and 6 months, which is a long time to onboard inventory. But also, I guess we're different in the sense that you know, we are more sort of slow you know, and steady in our portfolio size. You know, we've had a static portfolio size of about 25 properties for a number of years now, and only you know, more recently have we tried, or are we increasing that? So I think, you know, we're sitting at about 40 ish at the moment. So again, you know, more comparable to, I guess, the kind of sizes that Dave was talking about. You know, but we work a lot, like I said, I touched upon it before, you know, we support corporates in other locations through an affiliation we have, and you know, bringing on owners now, I guess there's challenges in the sales, property sales, you know, people paying over the asking prices, which reduces the margins and that kind of thing. However, you know, we are seeing a spike in service apartments are very popular for the owners, especially with some of the challenges around, you know, renovations and costs behind renovation prices. You know, sometimes the service apartment side are it's not more fruitful. So, like Toby says, like David says, you know, I do. We have to cherry pick the properties that we take on because it's got to fit the brand, it's got to fit our criteria, and ultimately, you know, if we wouldn't stay in the properties ourselves, we wouldn't have them available for our corporate clients. So, you know, that's very much our motto in the business.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Toby, has the type of properties that you're looking for changed as you've become more established and perhaps a bit more ambitious? Are you looking for bigger developments?
Yeah, in terms of quantity of units, for sure. I think we've quite gradually gone in a sort of stepping stone. We were aiming at buildings at 30 units a year or so ago. We're now kind of at 65 kind of units. And I think that's a stepping stone to really our goal is probably 150 units per development. But in terms of the unit size per building, I think that, again, that's probably area led. And the price point that you can achieve within that location. You know, obviously lower price point, you're talking your studios, and more premium nightly rates. You want more luxurious 2- and 3-bed apartments. We, as a company, try and stay away from the larger apartments simply due to the leisure aspect of that. Having parties, creating disruption for other longer term guests. So, you know, we're really studios to 2 beds. Is our focus.
Yeah, okay. Obviously, the sector has negotiated the pandemic really well, especially when you compare it with other areas of hospitality. But there are some headwinds around. Staffing is an issue. The cost of borrowing is becoming an issue. But in the main, Toby, I'll stick with you for a minute. Have you seen investors and lenders, has their sentiment towards the sector improved as a result of how it's performed over the last couple of years?
Absolutely. I think even the high street guys, your Savills, Knight Frank, you know, 2 years ago when we were calling those type of people, they weren't even aware or interested in talking to us. And now they have set up divisions within their business for things like rent to rent and things for leasing bulk opportunities. We've had you know, ironically, we now have them chasing us rather than the other way around, which is quite funny. And then in terms of investors, for sure, you know, investors, I think a lot of people want a hands-off experience, and this offering certainly offers that to them. You know, there's no heavy management charges involved, and actually that 5 to 10% that those guys are historically paying for management is an instant gain to them taking on a lease with a service apartment provider. So yeah, on all fronts, that's become a lot more positive.
Yeah. Claire, are you seeing new investors coming into the market in your area, interested in the model as a result of what they've seen over the last couple of years?
Definitely, I think we're seeing much more, you know, investors coming over from the short-term rental marketplace, you know, where they have come on board because of the success in the likes of Airbnb, OTAs from a leisure point of view. And some of the challenges I guess I have with that is that, you know, our model is different. You know, when you're working in the corporate market versus leisure, you know, it's not about necessarily the size of the house and how many people you can put in it. We're like Toby, you know, we stick to 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. We do have some larger properties, but you know, not as many, and only in, you know, locations that we feel that we can fill them again with corporate clients, not with travelers.
Yeah. Toby, do you think that this heightened awareness and interest has resulted in deals and opportunities coming your way, which maybe wouldn't have done if things had carried on without COVID?
Yeah, I think it's sped the process up. I think that's what it's done, and I think we're on a bit of a crest of the wave at the moment. And I think that, you know, anybody looking to expand, now is the time to do it. Also, you've got people that potentially had leases on long-term blocks that were just using them to re-rent out as residential bulk rent-to-rent deals in theory, that are actually coming to the end of terms, and a lot of capex now needs to go into that to get it to today's standard. We've seen a lot of those type of opportunities come to market that historically have been on 25-year leases and are now through that cycle. And yeah, I think that for us, we've been very lucky with the opportunities that have come to us and the relationships. I think that is the main thing, is the relationships that you've got and built, because in reality, these buildings are £10 million plus developments, and it's a lot to be trusted with for something that is a bit of an unknown sector to a lot of people.
Yeah, thanks, Toby. David, we on our sister website, Urban Living News, we've seen a couple of deals in the student sector fall through because parties who were very interested in buying 3 or 4 months ago have now been put off by the cost of borrowing as interest rates are going up. Is that a challenge you're seeing as you're looking for new opportunities, or do you anticipate becoming a challenge?
I think, if the rates go up and borrowing becomes very, untenable, then we'll look at that. But we've just, in the acquisition that we are doing at the moment, part self-funded, but a little bit borrowed as well. So, that's been something that's been granted and that we're comfortable to do as a company in general. We're very low geared, so it's, we don't have sort of huge sort of payments to worry about, but is definitely sort of there as a concern. So probably we'll a little while ago we were not quite so into the idea of leases because we'd always been sort of asset managed. That's kind of what we were comfortable with, and then suddenly when you're doing your P&Ls and you've got a couple of 100,000 that you've got to get rid of that you don't when you're sort of asset managing, it's just taken us a little bit of time to come round to that. But there's obviously increasing developments, investors in this, turning them into service departments, because we're seeing more and more sort of lease opportunities coming up, which is why we've sort of changed our viewpoint on that. On the one hand, you're not having to borrow to buy a building, and there's so many opportunities out there. So we have changed our points of view on leasing with all that sort of going around it.
Yeah. Is the type of property you're looking for to lease the same as the ones you would consider buying, or are there any subtle differences?
No, I think for us it has to be great location, has to fit in sort of the requisite number of apartments to make it viable, has to offer the right kind of sized apartment for us, so not too small. As I said before, we like to, part of our branding is that we've got apartments that offer space, so as long as they tick these boxes in places where we feel people want to go, leisure still tops out for us in our considerations. So when we're looking at a new destination, that's the sort of top thing that we consider. Why are people coming here, who's coming here? So I don't think I think in terms of choosing a property to lease, put very much the same thought process in. And would I want to own this, if I could own this as the asset, and is it an appealing building, attractive? So I think we put the same focus on both.
Yeah, okay, thanks, David. Toby, is the rising cost of borrowing affecting your expansion plans, or do you think it's likely to?
To date, touch wood, we haven't actually borrowed anything to get to kind of where we are now, and we've done it organically through cash flow of the business. Probably right now is not the ideal time to start looking at borrowing, especially not for a first deal, I wouldn't have thought. And the other thing that probably should be touched on is the increase of utility prices. With the type of user, this isn't a hotel setup or in the main where you have, a card entry system where once that guest leaves the room, 10 minutes later, everything turns off. Guests are quite capable of going out and leaving the air conditioning or the heating on 30 degrees and that being on for 20 hours, you know, so all that paired with the cost of borrowing is probably a bit of an uncertainty at the minute.
Does that affect the type of buildings that you look at in terms of obviously preferring those with efficient building management systems?
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the new EPC regulations are going to help that massively because of, you know, buildings having to be better insulated, which will obviously help in terms of utilities. But sure, we are definitely looking for newer buildings as opposed to historically we've taken on a Victorian or a 1960s or 80s type build where it may have been an office development that's been converted into flats at some point. So yeah, for sure, I think the more modern builds are definitely more appealing.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Toby. Obviously, one of the attractions of the service department model is it's much less labour intensive than other areas of hospitality. But I'm inclined to think that because you have fewer staff, that means the ones that you do have need to be absolutely top drawer. And it's not easy recruiting at the moment. David, how are you managing to attract and retain staff, and what are the main challenges involved?
Yes, so definitely we did have some challenges around that, and you know, we did lose a bit of workforce, and that did affect us in as much as we felt that sort of we didn't have enough housekeeping staff to run at 100% occupancy, so we did sort of scale back the stock that we were putting on the market, so you know we could still provide a good level of service. So you know there was a spell sort of a little while ago where we were maybe running more at 70-75% of what we could have been running if we were fully stocked. In terms of what we're trying to do, so I mentioned earlier actually that one of the things we did while we were a bit quieter is streamlined our systems. So you know we've made everything a little bit less labor intense, which you know makes life a bit easier on the people that are doing the job. Maybe you don't need quite so many numbers to do the job as well. So we've streamlined efficiency. That's one way. And then in terms of a sort of HR sort of perks, customer employee benefits and things like that, signed up with an organization that provides benefits to the employees. So just really trying to sort of make it a very attractive place to work. Sensible gearing at times when your staffing is a bit low, so you're not putting even more pressure on the people, and then you know they're feeling overworked and stressed and decide to find something else themselves. And we do a lot of market rate analysis as well, just you know make sure that we're paying on or just above the market rate, so you know people are feeling they're getting a good deal for you and are not sort of feeling like they're too overworked and stressed whilst they're doing the job. I think that's the key things for us to get on top of.
Yeah, thanks, David. Claire, how are you finding the recruitment situation?
Well, we're quite lucky, I guess. With you know, my core team is very small. I have an extended team that we work with, where I guess if you would use the term outsource, you know, my extended team are around 30 people that we work with on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, but my core team is only 4. So yes, I very much echo, you know, what you're saying about the, you know, them being tip top, but also, you know, we have values within the company and everyone's measured against those, the core team and you know, our external team, and I find that works really well. You know, we've been through different changes over the years, and you know, I'm very happy with the current structure that we have and the people that we work with. For me, it's all about the people. You know, so the values are very much, you know, we encourage that, and it's, you know, it's a very open workspace. You know, where you know we all work together. It's great teamwork. You know, don't get me wrong, we have our bad days as well, as everybody does, but you know, because we've got a small core team, we tend not to have a lot of improvement.
Thanks, Claire. Toby, you guys are moving out from your Bristol heartland, if you like, into new locations. So How are you finding recruiting people in areas where you haven't had a presence before?
Yeah, we kind of tried to foresee that as being an issue. So my business partner is my brother, as you know, and he lives in London and operates the Bristol portfolio from London anyway. And I think that actually the pandemic was really helpful for that, because we were all in an office prior to the pandemic, and then everybody went to work from home. So people kind of got used to that element. Charlie was then able to go back to London full time, as opposed to he was in Bristol Monday to Friday and then in London on the weekends. So he kind of stayed there full time. And then we took the view to actually move our head office to London, with the view that actually a lot more of our properties are going to be in that location, or surrounding that location. And also we found that there was probably a higher pool of candidates of a higher caliber coming from London than elsewhere in the country. So everybody that we've recruited since, I don't know, June last year has been London based. And that's where we're going to continue to kind of go, and the Bristol portfolio will end up being managed from London, although we will keep our on the ground staff employed in Bristol.
Thanks, Toby. I want to stay with you briefly, and we'll just touch on the ESG piece before we go to questions from the audience. So in your business, Toby, who's driving the ESG agenda? Is it coming from individual customers? Is it from corporate customers? Is it from investors, or is it a mix of all of the above?
I think it comes from everybody. I think everybody's got their own kind of want and need for it, and some people certainly focus on it a lot more than others, and to some people it's really, really important, and to others, they just want a comfortable place to stay and they're not really mindful of that. And I think it's how people actually operate in their home life as to whether, when they go away, do they continue that through, because down to recycling and all of these things are great, but if everybody does it, and I think that's really the issue. So I think it's coming from all parts. I think corporates are becoming a lot more sensitive to that element, but predominantly it's individual led. It's somebody's opinion on that subject.
But are you seeing travel buyers becoming more picky? Do they have a wish list around ESG?
I think that, booking.com have allowed you to add that to your advert, what elements that you're providing. And I've heard, from account managers and so forth, that has been part of a search, that they've realized that that's important. So that's why they've added it to their search. I've also heard in a building that we were looking at taking on, that's very close to a Microsoft office and very close to a Google office, that they will only go and put their staff somewhere that supplies a sustainable environment. So yeah, it's clearly going to become more prominent, but like I had been discussing with others, in buildings where you have had them for 5 years, it's very, very hard to retrofit items that make the building sustainable. If you're doing ground up build, then yeah, great, and there's all sorts of grants in place and all of that stuff, but retrofitting, it's not very easy.
Okay, thanks, Toby. David, at Mansley, the ESG drive, I guess we could say, is coming from the top down. Can you tell us a bit about what you're doing, and also whether that affects your choice of properties and makes new builds a more attractive proposition?
Well, certainly. So the owner of Mansley, Sir Richard Rowley, he adopted an electric car quite long before it was becoming fashionable to do so. It's always been in his sort of mindset that, to look at these issues. So we've signed up with Green Tourism, so we're working through their program. Obviously, our London buildings are in sort of 1800s buildings, so obviously they didn't consider you might want air conditioning back in those days. So like you say, it's not easy to retrofit, but with Green Tourism, I think they help you see where you can improve on sort of inefficient buildings, how you can make them more efficient. And then certainly on the new projects that we've got, because they're pre-development at the moment, so they're going to be built, so you can put in sort of all the very best requirements for around that, and know the developers that we're working with, it's very high on their agendas as well. So I think that the two future ones that we hope that we'll see next year, they'll be very, very high on the eco-friendly scale. Aside from that, we'll work with hoteliers charter and the various points that they put in, that they sort of ask you to be able to provide for the employees, living wage employer, and our Scottish properties resource the milk from local farms. So that's something that we're keen, sourcing local as much as possible. And I think that's something that customers are looking for, or even if they're not looking for it, actually really appreciate that you do it. And then also, as a company, we put aside 3% of profits for charitable donations as well, and I think that's quite a high percentage actually if you look at what a lot of people do. So that goes to a committee, and I know we've donated some to sort of local charity, to the Kensington building, which is sort of our main office. So we take all of our responsibilities very seriously in that aspect.
Thanks, David. Just to finish up on the ESG thing, Claire, I just wanted to ask you if you think corporate travel buyers' ESG requirements are getting more demanding, if you think that's the direction of travel.
It's very important, and I think, like David and Toby have said, it's about your personal ethos and how you see it. I think it's necessary. There's certain things that we do in the business, to try and reduce, energy usage, sustainable welcome packs and things like that. And I think that is attractive to corporate clients that we work with, because they like to see people proactively, working towards the same end goal, same end goals. So I think increased awareness is making people expect it in business.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Claire. So we've got a question here from an audience member, Kritika Singh. Thanks for your question. As we've got companies on the session some who major in corporate travel and some in leisure, this will be an interesting one to see your respective answers. Toby, I'll ask you first. With ADR on the rise, how are service departments coping with the service level expectations from leisure guests versus corporate guests?
Yeah, I think it's again, it comes down to building specific as to what you can offer. As an example, we've got some buildings that have got 7 to 10 apartments in, which are in a residential building. Although it is the whole building, there isn't really much you can offer in terms of amenity. We offer a welcome pack which is locally sourced, is high end. So all the products within that are locally sourced, but are very good products. And we're not offering a spa treatment. We're not offering gym facilities, restaurant space. But the things that we can do is we find out a lot about the local area. We do contra deals with those brands or all the independents. We pass all of that on to our customer. I think that we try and create a package for them so that they kind of know the best of the best type of place that they want to go to. We spend a lot of time kind of doing research on that and speaking to local businesses. So I think that adds an element of value. Clearly the quality within the apartment. I don't think that there's, I think that corporate travelers are used to a certain standard, but I also think leisure travelers are maybe slightly more needy in terms of their experience, and they want somebody to speak to. So, the service apartment actual self-check-in thing maybe isn't favorable for a lot of our leisure guests, because some people want to know how the code works and how do I get to my apartment. And, we send all of this information, but maybe sometimes it's not read. So that maybe creates a bit of an issue. So the one thing I would say, if you're able to, is to have somebody on site, which we now in one of our Bristol buildings have a space for that. So one of our team members works from there between 9 and 5 and helps guests. So that app helps with reviews and adding a level of service that maybe you wouldn't get in a small building like that. We've also incorporated co-working spaces into buildings that we can. So offices that sit between sort of 10 and 30 people. In the smaller apartments, that really adds some value so that people can get out of a studio apartment, go and use a laptop somewhere else. So we found that that's quite good. It's also quite good for people's mental health, just to be in an environment where other people are. So, you know, they're the things that we've managed to do. In Milton Keynes, we're putting a small gym into the building and a co-working space. So, you know, it's adding amenity where you can, but, you know, again, very building dependent.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Toby. And David, as an operator with a majority leisure customer base, how do you see service level expectations changing between the two?
Well, so we a lot like what Toby just said, actually, you know, we do not have gym, restaurants, breakfast rooms on site, so that's not a service that we're able to provide. What we do provide is sort of welcome packs with as much locally sourced product in it as possible. I think that's always nice when you turn up at your apartment and the fridge is already loaded with the essentials. We have a brand app, so our customers, they can go onto the app, and that sort of has replaced like the traditional tabletop welcome manual, if you like, just sort of streamlined it a lot more. But what it does include is like how-to videos to use like some of the white goods in your apartment. So, you know, there's a very common question to come down and ask how you use the dryer and things like that. So this is sort of all provided in a nice sort of easy to use method. And we have got receptions, so, you know, we are able to provide that sort of face-to-face level engagement with the customers, that they can feel welcome to come down and ask how the dryer works if they feel the need to. And obviously there's sort of the concierge services that we provide around that, to book various tickets if they wish. And in sort of reception at the mansions, we've got a little chessboard on the reception desk, and sort of as guests come through, they're invited to sort of take a turn. So, you know, it's a way to sort of break the ice and sort of get to know your customers and really sort of make them feel welcome in the office and in the building as the whole. So that's how we're approaching that. I know the corporate customer probably maybe doesn't care quite so much about those elements, but you know, our big focus is leisure, and everyone gets a nice welcome in a Mansley property.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Well, we've come to the end of our hour. That's flown by as usual. A great discussion. Thank you to our panelists. We're just going to show a couple of quick slides before we sign off. So the next Service Department News webinar is on July the 21st, and we'll be expanding on one of the topics that we've touched on already today: new build versus conversion, the pros and cons. You can register for that using the QR code that's on the screen there, or you can see the details in the chat to register. And next month is our flagship event. For the second year, we'll be holding the Urban Living Festival in London. This year it's at the East Winter Garden at Canary Wharf. There's currently a 20% discount off ticket prices to Service Department News readers, and if you look in the chat, you can see the code to redeem there if you want to come along and get your 20% off, and we'd love to see lots of you there. It's a bit more information about the event there, and you can see the web address there, urbanlivingfestival.com, if you'd like to find out more. If you're interested in sponsoring any of our webinars or our events, please do get in touch with Katie, whose contact details are on the screen and also in the chat. Thanks for watching. Thanks ever so much to Claire, David and Toby for their input. It was a great discussion today. If you're on social media, do give us a follow on the platforms you can see on the slide there. Thanks to IMS for sponsoring. We're going to leave the session open for a couple of minutes because there's quite a lot of information in the chat. So if you want to make any notes from the chat, you've got a couple of minutes to do so. Other than that, I'd just like to say thanks for watching. Thanks to our panelists, and see you all on the next webinar. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, George.
Thank you.